Okay, for rule number 8, action to avoid collision, we're now getting into kind of a new part of the rules. Previously, we've talked about how to determine risk of collision, the effectiveness of a lookout system in determining risk of collision. And now, if you decide there is going to be a collision, what action must be taken to avoid it? Later in the rules, we'll talk about specific cases such as the head-on, the meeting, the overtaking situation. But rule number 8 talks about general action to avoid collision. The key words here are early, substantial, and readily apparent. So what I mean by that is if you are the vessel that is required to maneuver according to the rules later on in the book, your action needs to be taken early, right? So you can't wait until the last minute to take avoiding action. It also needs to be substantial. So it needs to be big enough so that vessels around you can see it and that it's going to make a big difference in your collision avoidance vectors. Finally, like I say, it needs to be readily apparent to all the vessels around you. So what I mean by readily apparent is, example here, if vessel red and vessel black are meeting so as to involve risk of collision, later we'll learn that this is called a crossing situation, but suffice it to say that in the last rule, rule number 7, we learned that they're on a constant bearing with a decreasing range, so they will collide. Well, what action needs to be taken? In this case, vessel red needs to maneuver, and it's got a couple options, right? What if it slowed down its speed? It could do that, right? And vessel black would pass ahead of it. Well, if it's going to do that, it should do it in a substantial manner. So if this vessel was proceeding at 10 knots and vessel black was proceeding at 10 knots, the mathematical vectors indicate that they're going to collide, right? Well, if vessel red slows down to 9 knots, technically they may not collide, right? They're going to get very close, but they may not collide. That is not apparent to vessel black. They may be able to use their radar plotting aids to determine that there was a speed change, but if you've ever looked at a radar, as vessels move over the waves, you can see that the speed changes constantly, right? So it's hard to detect that speed change. So the vessel black may be wondering what vessel red is going to do. So if you do decide to make a speed change, one way to do it would be to drastically or substantially reduce your speed so that the other vessel can pass ahead of you. And what I mean in this case, if both vessels were going 10 knots and I was on vessel red, I would probably slow my speed to 0 or bare steerage way, just a couple of knots. That way it would be readily apparent to vessel black that it can pass ahead of me. The rules also say that oftentimes a course change might be the most efficient way to make an action to avoid collision. So in this case, if vessel red were to change its course to the starboard, to the right, and vessel black would then pass ahead of vessel red. So if instead of pointing to the east, it started pointing more like that, then vessel black would pass no problem. Well, again, we want to refer to the rules that the action is readily apparent. So if this vessel changed its course by 5 degrees, you may avoid collision, but you're still going to be in a close quarters situation. It's also not readily apparent to vessel black. So what this vessel should do is it should make a substantial course change. So if this were me in a crossing situation, I would probably change my course by 30 to 45 degrees. You may say that's a drastic course change. Well, that's exactly the point. It needs to be substantial and readily apparent to the other vessel. That does not mean I need to maintain that course forever, right? I need to make sure that the other vessel knows what I'm doing, and then as it passes in front of me, I can bring my course back. So I would change my course by a large amount so that the vessel saw what's called a different aspect on my vessel. So instead of previously seeing my starboard bow, now it's going to be seeing my bow or my port bow even. That's going to make it readily apparent to vessel black that I've taken action to avoid collision. It also states in the rules that a succession of small course changes should be avoided. That's exactly the situation we're talking about. This vessel should not alter its course by 5 degrees and then change it by another 5, and so on and so forth as these vessels get closer together. You should make one large course change, make it readily apparent to the other vessel that you've changed course. At night, a good way to think about it is your side lights. So on this vessel here, it's going to have red and green side lights, right? And so vessel black, if it's out here, it's looking at a green side light on this vessel, right? But if you were to change your course drastically, right? Now vessel black might be either able to see both the red and green side lights, or even just the red side light. That will let them know that they've made a substantial course change. It's very comforting to see an aspect change of a vessel if you're in a crossing situation and you're the stand-on vessel. So in this case here, we'll learn later that this is a crossing situation, and vessel blue is the one that can keep going. Vessel red's supposed to avoid vessel blue in this case. The best course of action for vessel red is going to be to pass astern of vessel blue. So the vessel should navigate like this. However, if you're putting yourself on vessel blue, what do you want to see on vessel red? You want to see a large course change that lets you know that they know what they're doing. Right? So if this vessel just decides to make small course changes as you get closer and closer and just skim right behind you, that's not a safe situation. Right? So the initial course change should be large, it should be substantial, it should be early. And as you pass, it's fine for vessel red to kind of bring its course back and even pass you closely astern, but you need to monitor that situation until well past and clear. So the rules say that the best course of action is an early course change. Also vessel red in this case could stop itself, so vessel blue passes ahead. It could increase its speed and pass ahead of blue, but in that case that's not really in accordance with the rules of good seamanship, which the rules also state. So in this case, the best case scenario for vessel red is to make a large course change, so vessel blue can see a different aspect of it, and then vessel red will pass behind vessel blue. Lastly, the important part about action to avoid collision is both vessels need to monitor the situation until it's well past and clear, so that if anything changes over the course of the passing situation, both vessels are aware of the situation. All right, so you need to monitor this until it's well past and clear. And then the last little bit of that rule talks about kind of good seamanship and practices of, the observance of good seamanship is the words that it says there. So speeding up your vessel to cross ahead of vessel black would probably be okay mathematically, but not according to the rules. It's not a practice of good seamanship. So go ahead and pause the video now and take the quiz for this section, and then we'll talk about it in just a minute. Okay, so for the first question, what is a requirement for any action to avoid collision? Well, it must be positive and made in ample time. Those are the words that the rules use. It does not necessarily mean the vessel needs to change speed or sound signals. In terms of action to avoid collision, we're just talking about early and ample action to avoid collision. For the second question, when action to avoid a close quarters situation is taken, a course change alone may be the most effective action, provided that it is a large course change, right? So we should avoid a succession of small course changes. It doesn't matter what direction the course change is. Generally, it's going to be to starboard. You'll see later. But it needs to be done early and substantially. For the next question, both international and inland, when in sight of another vessel and there is sufficient sea room, any action to avoid collision must what? Well, it shouldn't result in another close quarters situation. So you can't take yourself out of the frying pan and put yourself into the fire, right? So it should not result in another close quarters situation. The other answers, sound signals and speed change, they're not the correct answer. They may be good ideas in certain cases, but the rules say that it shall not result in another close quarters situation. And then finally, both international and inland, when you take action to avoid collision, you should what? You should make sure that the action is taken in enough time. It needs to be early. It needs to be substantial. So avoiding large course or speed changes is incorrect. It needs to be a large course change, large speed change that's readily apparent and taken early. In terms of testing strategy for this rule, there's only about 10 questions in the database, so you may see 1 or 2 on your exam, but the key elements to this: early, substantial, and readily apparent to the other vessel.